Of course, President Trump has spent much of this day exulting over his impeachment acquittal and lashing out at his opponents. It all started this morning at the National Prayer Breakfast. Usually this is supposed to be a nonpartisan event, but he took it what looked like clear shots at Nancy Pelosi and Mitt Romney. Joining me now to talk about it, Democratic Senator Chris Coons, who serves on the Judiciary and Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, it is good to see you. And
good to see you, Chris.
I mention Mitt Romney and Nancy Pelosi because you wrote an op-ed, and the headline is "Why I Pray for Donald Trump." And I want to play what he said this morning at the National Prayer Breakfast. Take a listen.
I don't like people who use their faith as justification for doing what they know is wrong. Nor do I like people who say, "I pray for you," when they know that that's not so.
And then just a short time ago, he made a comment about, he had said things about Nancy Pelosi while she was sitting just a few feet away from him. And I just want to get your reaction to what you heard from the president, given especially what you wrote in that op-ed.
Well, Chris, my experience as the co-chair of the National Prayer Breakfast 3 years ago, which I described in that editorial, is not really about who Donald Trump is. It's about who we are. And folks who gathered this morning again for this decades-old bipartisan, non-sectarian event that attracts people from all over the world, from 100 countries, thousands of people from every state, from every possible background, political, ethnic, linguistic, religious, geographic. We gather to celebrate the importance of humbling ourselves and praying for each other. In fact, the person who spoke just before President Trump is named Arthur Brooks. He gave a very powerful speech on loving thy enemy. And it was a message that I think was designed for both Speaker Pelosi and President Trump to challenge them, to show that they could rise above the partisan tempers of the moment. And I was disappointed that clearly they didn't take his message to heart. If I could, Chris, for one moment, the most inspiring part of the 2 days of the National Prayer Breakfast for me was a lunch yesterday where I got to introduce the president of Kenya and his chief political rival, the former prime minister. These two have fought each other hammer and tongs in election after election for nearly 20 years. And it's resulted in deep divisions, lots of violence, many people killed in riots as several different elections in Kenya produced convulsions. The two of them publicly reconciled and have now been traveling around their home country talking about how they can move past political and ethnic and partisan divisions in the nation of Kenya. That was an inspiring example for me and for many of us who got to hear them yesterday.
So conversely,
I wish that
Senator,
at this morning's breakfast, we could do that for the rest of the world.
Conversely, we heard the president, and I talked about this earlier, he used words for Democrats like sleazebags, leakers, liars, loathsome, stone cold crazy. And in the East Room of the White House, he also said BS, except he said the entire word, which a lot of people tweeted about. And the things that he said that were clearly political this morning at the breakfast, as Chuck Todd just pointed out, in that East Room, it's clear it's the party of Donald Trump. But what was the reaction to the president's political statements this morning among the people who were there at the National Prayer Breakfast?
Well, Chris, the challenge for the prayer breakfast has always been to avoid turning it into a political rally. When President Obama spoke, when President Clinton spoke, when President Bush spoke, they managed to speak to the things that bring us together and to our common concerns. That wasn't the case this morning. It was more of a political rally, much like the presentation you just described in the East Room. And to me, that was a disappointment. As I make clear in the editorial you just referenced that I wrote that's in the Washington Post this morning, I disagree with President Trump. I oppose him on some of his policies. But that doesn't mean, as a matter of faith, that I can't pray for him and hope for him and his family that they will find peace and that they will know a faith that challenges them to rise above some of the current positions that he holds and the actions that he's taken. That's really what pray for your enemies means, is to humble yourself, open your heart, and not return slander for slander and attack for attack, but to instead genuinely wish good for the folks who are your opponents. That's why I regularly participate in a bipartisan prayer breakfast here in the Senate. It's so that we here, Republicans and Democrats, can respect each other and learn from each other. I frankly, Chris, think it is the only way forward for us in this deeply divided moment.
Senator Chris Coons, thank you very much. Always appreciate your time.
Thank you, Chris.